Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 68, Conclusions, Part 1. For these conclusions, I have not used recent secondary literature. I intend to read secondary literature when I decide to write an article on this dialogue. I presume that some of the points I'll be making have already been made in the secondary literature, and I will acknowledge them there in the article. As we have seen, the dialogue is full of bad argumentation. Socrates leads Euthyphro wherever he wants, and there is no conclusion at the end of the dialogue. The very premise for the discussion is preposterous. Socrates claims that if he knows what tohosion is, the holy, then he will be able to convince Meletus to drop the charges against him. Euthyphro's first attempt at explaining the holy is to say that it is what he himself is doing. He's prosecuting his father. This is the most pertinent answer, considering that Socrates appears to be concerned with his case. So Euthyphro is saying here, look at my case, this is what the holy is, what I'm doing. Philosophically, it isn't a definition, it's simply an example. But it's an example we should take into account when we actually come round to looking at what the holy is. Socrates obviously points out the problem with this answer because he's looking for the holy, altogether the idea, the aspect of the holy in every holy thing, every holy action, every holy instance, and just giving one example won't do. Under pressure to generalize, Euthyphro gives the answer that the holy is what is loved by the gods, which indicates that he feels that what he is doing, prosecuting his father, is loved by the gods, or that he himself is loved by the gods. But Socrates refutes this answer by introducing the notion that people fight over what cannot be measured, which is a very suspect claim. People tend to fight over anything. What is loved by some gods is hated by other gods, and this leads to the compromise solution that the holy is what is loved by all the gods. Euthyphro jumps on this solution even though it doesn't follow from the argument that the gods cannot agree over what is just, because justice is one of the qualities which cannot be measured. This doesn't really matter because now Socrates can make the very strong claim that even if all the gods love the holy, we haven't said what the holy itself is, because being loved by the gods is an affect and not the essence of the holy. This sounds like a good refutation, but it ignores the possibility that the holy is precisely anything which is loved by all the gods. Before Euthyphro's next answer to what is holy, Socrates introduces the concept of the reverent, το eusebes, the quality a good person would have towards an authority figure, for example, a god or even a parent. And we've already seen that Euthyphro is not very respectful to his father. Socrates identifies the holy with the reverent, and this encourages Euthyphro to say that the holy is the therapeia of gods. Therapeia is something like service, the sort of thing that a servant would do. And even Euthyphro himself describes the relationship between humans and gods as between slaves and masters. But Socrates perverts the sense of therapeia and makes it almost techne, without actually saying techne, until the very end of the argument. Socrates also assumes that any techne, craft, skill, art, is to do with making the subject of the techne better. And for this reason, he keeps pushing for an answer to what this therapia of gods does for the gods. In what way does it make the gods better? Even Euthyphro recognizes that the gods are not made better by humans, and he resorts to saying that the therapia of the gods is pleasing to the gods. Euthyphro has no problem with this, despite the fact that this was what led to the first refutation. If the holy is merely what is pleasing to the gods, we still don't know what the holy itself is. Socrates then pushes for a third answer, and it's at this point that Euthyphro decides to leave the conversation. He doesn't have another answer. Now, does that mean that he has been convinced that he doesn't know what the holy is? No, it doesn't mean that at all. He blames Socrates for twisting the arguments, making what he said appear to be different from what he meant, and he clearly still thinks that the holy is pleasing to the gods and that his prosecution of his father is a good thing. Many philosophers don't even get this far. They assume that Plato is asking questions because he doesn't know either, but he's asking very good questions, and it's making us think for ourselves. And this justifies their inclination to go off at a tangent and talk about justice in monotheism. They call this the Euthyphro dilemma, although there is no dilemma at all in the dialogue. The Euthyphro dilemma is a sort of springboard for all sorts of arguments concerning a monotheistic God and morality. Does God approve of what is good and tell us to do it, or does God just tell us what to do, and that is supposed to be morality, an arbitrary fiction? Either God is as dependent as we are on the good, in which case God is irrelevant to morality, or morality is just based on the whims of God, and therefore morality is not good. It's a little depressing to think that the popularity of Euthyphro for the last few hundred years has been due to monotheism and problems rising from it. So, back to the dialogue. Are there any clues in the dialogue where we should go next? We've seen that the argumentation itself is not very good. It goes all over the place, and even Euthyphro has complained about it. He said that it was Socrates who was making the argument change, his answers change. And Socrates himself said, it's probably because I'm related to Daedalus. In other words, he's a sculptor just like Daedalus was, and Daedalus made statues come back to life, and they moved. And Socrates is saying, yes, that's something I do. I make arguments come to life, and they change. However, at the end of the dialogue, Socrates charges Euthyphro with changing. Euthyphro is like Proteus. He has the answer, but he refuses to give the answer, and he changes all the time in order to avoid being caught, just like Proteus. Clearly, Socrates doesn't really believe that Euthyphro knows, or that he is unwilling to share his knowledge. He just says this to keep up the pretense that Euthyphro can teach him, so that Socrates can carry on asking him questions and getting answers from him. But why suggest that Euthyphro himself changes? The fact that Euthyphro seems to be completely unworried by the conclusion that they reach in the second argument, that the holy is pleasing to the gods, even though this is what led to the refutation of the first argument, suggests that the first refutation had no effect on him. He still thinks that the holy is pleasing to the gods and that what he is doing is God-loved. Indeed, he will carry on prosecuting his father. We have no evidence to the contrary. Plato could have had him go back into the Stoa of the Archon Basilius to take back his deposition, had he realized the error of his ways. Instead of considering the possibility that he himself is confused, he accuses Socrates of changing the meanings of words and making the arguments move. The dialogue itself, therefore, seems to show that Euthyphro is static. He does not change at all. And this is what the observation by Socrates seems to have been intended to do. Plato wanted the reader to consider the character himself and not the argument so much. We should be looking at the characters, and Euthyphro does not change. So what does he represent? This is the next question. We know that Euthyphro is very concerned about miasma, pollution, and the dialogue provides us with enough information to help us understand how Euthyphro treats miasma. Euthyphro regards humans as virtually the slaves of the gods. That is our status. It's not as if we have to work for the gods, because the gods have everything they want, and in fact the gods are the ones who provide humans with all human goods. What bothers Euthyphro is that if we anger the gods, they turn away, they stop giving us those goods. And what causes the gods to turn away? When we anger them, when we do something they don't like, and that includes murder. Evidently, murder is even worse than disrespecting one's parents, because Euthyphro is prepared to prosecute his own father on the understanding that prosecuting his father for murder in the court of the Archon Basilius will remove the miasma which Euthyphro is convinced has settled on his family. It's interesting to note that the Athenians laugh at Euthyphro for taking mythology seriously. His family complain to him about prosecuting his father, and yet the court of the Archon Basilius is set up precisely for removing miasma.